You all know about the miraculous seeds that found themselves planted on good, solid earth. They were the ones that took root and grew and grew and grew. I imagine that you've heard how we're supposed to be the seeds on the good soil. We need to take root in the good soil of the Spirit. If we pay attention to God's word and do what God expects of us, then we'll be happy and strong and good things will happen to us. You've heard all this before, so why bother listening? You might be thinking about what you'll be having for lunch or going to getting some barbecue chicken or supper later today. It might occur to you that this would be a good time to just tune out and let your mind wander. That's fine. But there's something you need to hear before you drift out onto a daydream. Did you notice that every once in a while Jesus stops telling the story and asks, "Are you listening?" Actually, this isn't a story about seeds sprouting or seeds dying. It's not a story about how we're different kinds of seeds or even different types of soil. It's not a story about all the thorny parts in our lives. It's not a story about how shallow and self-centered we've become. It's not a story about turning ourselves around so we can be good seeds. This is a story of the sower, the one who is planting the seeds. And if you listen, really listen, you'll discover that the sower doesn't give up. So what if some of the seeds don't take root? So what if some of the seeds get smothered by the weeds? So what if the birds come along and eat the seeds? The sower doesn't seem to care one bit. The sower just keeps throwing seeds all over the place. Are you listening? Jesus asks. Are you getting it yet? This is a story about an extravagant God who throws seeds everywhere, and wherever they land, it's okay. This is a story about a God who isn't practical, who doesn't take inventories. There's no limit to the seeds God, the sower, has. It's fine with the sowing God to just keep throwing seeds for all eternity. Now, we wouldn't do it that way, of course. If we were in charge, we would be much more efficient. We'd be neater and cleaner and come up with a planting system that would be much more productive. We'd make sure that we'd get better results. We'd come up with some way to ensure that our yield was better. We'd spend a lot of time planning and analyzing the situation so that none of our seed would be wasted on birds or rocks or thorn bushes. But if we listen, we can hear Jesus telling us that the sower is reckless. The sower is less concerned with productivity than with plenitude. In Somerville, Georgia, there is a place called Paradise Garden. It was created by Howard Finster. Mr. Finster was a folk artist who, at the time of his death a number of years ago, was a 70-plus-year-old visionary who had planted close to 10,000 of his visions on plywood, broken mirrors, soft drink bottles, canned ham tins, old refrigerators, mailboxes, Delta airline plates, high-top sneakers, and even an old Cadillac that was rusting in his garage. Mr. Finster was once a Baptist preacher who served 7 or 8 churches in rural Georgia and Alabama before he became disillusioned in the early 1970s. After preaching 4,625 sermons, after presiding at more than 400 funerals and 200 weddings, he conducted a survey of his church and found out that no one remembered anything he had said. That's all. So he retired from preaching and began fixing things instead. until 1976, when an inner voice from God told him to paint sacred art. "I can't," Finster told the voice. "I'm no professional." "How do you know you can't?" the voice demanded, and Finster's career as an artist began. His work is both plant beautiful and bizarre, but his 3-acre paradise garden is fascinating and was under construction for over 20 years. This is what I've read about his garden. The walkways are embedded with old watches, gears, jewelry, marbles, and pottery shards. There's a 20-foot tower fashioned from old bicycles, crowned with a cross made out of 2 lawnmower handles. There is a 2-ton concrete shoe, a pump house made from Coca-Cola bottles, an aquarium holds the bones of a 3-legged chicken, along with a shed of old sewing machines. Along the path, there's a 6-foot mound of serpents sculpted from poured cement. There are bubblegum machines, bunk bed springs, empty picture frames, and flights of stairs that lead nowhere. Now, it might seem that nature would be offended by such a display, but that's not the case. The entire garden is covered in a canopy of vines with ripening fruit. There are blackberry vines and blueberry bushes. Daylilies bloom happily. Hens lay eggs, bees make honey, and tadpoles turn into frogs in the paradise garden. As the story is told, this is the most gorgeous pile of garbage anyone has ever seen. Mr. Finster painted a sign on his front porch that reads, "I took the pieces you threw away and put them together night and day. Washed by rain, dried by sun, 1,000,000 pieces, all in one." There's no doubt about it. Mr. Finster was outrageous and extravagant, and there wasn't a moderate bone in his body. One of Mr. Finster's signs says, "I built this park of broken pieces to try to mend a broken world." Another sign says, "It's watermelon time. Get your knife, eat, shout, and shine." Or there's this thought of Mr. Finster's: if you happen to get stepped on, just keep walking. Even today, some people see this paradise garden and want to organize it, weed it, straighten it out. They want to have the signs posted to explain what everything means. In an interview, Mr. Finster said, "What I do talks. I figure when I'm deceased, my work will be talking, same as if I were here." Jesus used things that were familiar to people to get the subject over to them. God's message is getting around. Once upon a time, a planter went out to sow. As he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came along and devoured them. So he put his seed patch down and spent the next hour or so stringing aluminum foil all over his field. He put a fake owl that he had ordered from a garden catalog, and as an afterthought, he hung a couple of traps for Japanese beetles. Then he returned to his planting. But he noticed some of the seeds were falling on rocky ground. So he put his seed pouch down again and went to get his wheelbarrow and shovel. A couple hours later, he had dug up the rocks and was trying to think of something useful he could do with them when he remembered to get back to his sowing. But as soon as he did, he ran into a briar patch that would certainly strangle his little seedlings. So he put his pouch down again and looked everywhere for weed poison, but finally decided to just pull the thorns up by hand, and that meant that he had to go search for his work gloves. By the time he had the briars cleared, it was getting dark, so the sower picked up his pouch and tools and decided to call it a day. That night, he fell asleep in his chair reading a seed catalog, and when he woke up the next next morning, he walked out into his field and found a big crow sitting on his big owl. He found rocks he hadn't found the day before, and he discovered new little leaves on the roots of the briars that he had broken off in his hand. Considering all of this, the sower pushed his cap back on his head and began to laugh. At first it was just a chuckle, but soon his laugh turned into a full-fledged guffaw and ended up in a wheeze that took his breath away. Still wheezing and laughing, he went after his seed pouch and began flinging seeds everywhere, into the roots of trees, onto the roof of his house, across all of his fences, and into his neighbors' fields. He shook seeds at his cows and offered a handful to the dog. He even tossed a fistful of seeds into the creek, thinking they might take root downstream somewhere. The more he sowed, the more he seemed to have. None of it made any sense to him, but for once, it didn't matter. He had to admit that he had never been happier in all his life. Listen to this. God's love and grace is spread all over the place. It doesn't have to make sense to us. It just keeps coming and coming. There are times when we just don't get it. There are times when we're not open to God's grace, times when we'd rather choke it off before it grows too far. They just keep coming. The seeds of love, forgiveness, and grace just keep being tossed our way. The theologian and author Thomas Long writes, "It is truly the generosity of God that gives abundance, the generosity of God that magnifies our best interests into a fruitful, extravagant, and altogether gracious yield. Therefore, the church is called to waste itself, to throw grace around like there's no tomorrow, precisely because there is tomorrow, and it belongs to God. Thank God for God's amazing generosity and abundant love that doesn't seem to mind where it winds up. Thank God for abundant and reckless love that doesn't give up. May we, as part of Christ's church, be wise enough to waste ourselves and throw grace around with joy and recklessness, as we thank God for all of the tomorrows in our lives. Are you listening yet? Amen. I'd like you to join me in a litany of abundance. God provides generously.
God asks us to share.
In God's good earth, there is food enough for everyone. God provides generously.
God asks us to share.
God sends us into the world as a promise of plenty.
God asks us to share.
God sends us into the world to be people of bountiful love, to be people of great generosity, to be people of unbounded joy. God sends us into the world as a promise of plenty.
God asks us to share.
God's world is a world with more than enough. God's world overflows with goodness to support all God's creatures, great and small. God only asks one thing to make it all work.
God asks us to share.
Amen. we enter into our time of prayer together, are there joys to be lifted up this morning? You're all doing well? Along with joys, we often have concerns. There are concerns that anyone would like to share this morning. Let us pray. Extravagant God, here on your good earth there is food enough, shelter enough, air, water, and land enough for everyone. You generously provide for all. Teach us to share your abundance. Your love and generosity are gifts for all your people in all parts of the world. Help us to become people of bountiful love, people of great generosity, people of unbounded joy. Help us to share your promise of plenty. Teach us to share your abundant love. Your world, O God, is a world with more than enough. Your world overflows with goodness, enough to support all creatures, great and small. You ask only one thing in order to make it all work. You ask us to share. Teach us to share your abundant gift of life. Reckless God, sometimes we despair of your generosity. We look around and see hopelessness and fear. We're told there isn't enough and that we don't have enough. Today we've been reminded that you have given us all enough. And that indeed we have more than we need. Come to us, merciful God, teach us to share all we have so that everyone will have enough. Extravagant God, help us to trust in your abundant love. Help us to sow seeds of faith graciously and freely as you have done with us. Open our senses, open our lives, open us to you. We pray all these things in the name of the one who teaches us about your unending love and generosity. Hear us now as we offer the prayer your Son, our Christ, has taught us to say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but